You think you're walking away from conflict. You think you're choosing peace, but what if I told you that cutting ties with toxic people is not the end of the battle? It's the beginning of a far more dangerous war. One not fought in words or actions, but in silence, in the mind, in the soul. Because when you walk away from someone who is draining your energy, controlling your emotions, or confusing your identity, they don't just disappear, they echo. They live in the small decisions you second-guess, in the shame that wasn't yours to carry but still lives in your chest, in the way you hesitate to trust, to speak up, to breathe freely. You see, the most dangerous thing about toxic people isn't what they do when they're near. It's what they leave behind when they're gone. Carl Jung saw this with clarity that few dared to face. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And here's the brutal truth. Toxic relationships don't just hurt. They infiltrate. They rewire how you see yourself, and unless you're willing to confront the psychic residue they leave behind, you're not cutting ties. You're just changing chains. Maybe you've already done it. Maybe you've walked away from someone who made you feel small, confused, invisible, and yet part of you still hears their voice when you make decisions, still flinches when you're not understood, still carries guilt for doing what was necessary to survive. This is where the real work begins, not with confrontation but with integration, because here's what Jung teaches us over and over again. The psyche is not a clean slate. It absorbs. And unless you reclaim every part of yourself that was distorted in that toxic dynamic, you will live their shadow as your fate. Before continuing with the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more videos like this when they are released. You didn't just walk away from them. You walked away from a role they needed you to play, the hero, the villain, the savior, the scapegoat. But here's the problem. You might have left the stage, but the costume is still clinging to your skin. Carl Jung called this projection, a silent, unconscious mechanism where someone refuses to face their own inner darkness and instead casts it onto you. And once that projection lands, you stop being a person in their eyes. You become a symbol, a container, a mirror reflecting back everything they refuse to confront within themselves. Think about it. That person who always made you feel like you were the problem, even when you were just breathing. That relationship where your kindness was twisted into manipulation, your strength turned into arrogance, your love made to feel like a trap. They weren't seeing you. They were reacting to something inside them, but punishing you for it. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more you start to see yourself through their lens. You begin to doubt your intentions. You start apologizing for existing. You forget what your own emotions feel like. This is not just emotional abuse, it's psychic colonization. You become occupied by another person's unconscious, and by the time you walk away, you're no longer sure what parts of you are real and what parts were just reflections of their shadow. This is why walking away isn't enough, because their voice might still live inside your own. Their projections might still distort your reflection in the mirror. Jung warned us. What is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event, and often that event is you. You became their battlefield, and now to heal, you have to ask the hardest question of all. What if everything they blamed you for wasn't yours to carry? You have to begin the exorcism of identity, to strip away every mask they placed on your face, to reclaim your truth, not the one they assigned you, but the one that existed before you were ever pulled into their story. And maybe right now, you're already in that process. Maybe you're angry, confused, exhausted. Good, because that's the first sign that you are no longer playing the role. Not every toxic person screams. Some smile. Some are so good at being good, they make you feel like you must be the problem for feeling off. They're perfect, on paper, always saying the right thing, always performing the role society expects of them. But underneath, nothing, no soul, no depth, only, oh, depth. A mask. Carl Jung called this the persona, the false identity we wear to function in society. And he warned us, The persona is what one is not, but what oneself and others think one is. It's not just a mask. It's a trap, a self-imposed prison built from expectations, applause, and control. And when you're in a relationship with someone ruled by their persona, you don't realize what's happening at first. You just feel disconnected, unseen, like something's missing, but you can't name it. Everything feels too polished, too smooth, too rehearsed, until one day you realize you've been talking to a costume. And worse, that costume expects you to play a part too, to stay within the script, to be agreeable, pleasant, predictable. But the moment you express a real emotion, a raw, unscripted truth, they shut down, withdraw, or worse, subtly punish you for it. You've broken character. And in their world, that's unforgivable, because your authenticity threatens their illusion. You see, the bearer of the persona doesn't just hide from their own truth, they require everyone around them to do the same. And if you stay long enough, you start performing too. You tone yourself down. You smile when you're hurting. You say what's appropriate instead of what's real, not because they told you to, but because their false stability punishes anything unpredictable. Jung warned us, the more someone identifies with their persona, the more they repress their true self. And everything that's repressed doesn't die. It festers. It becomes shadow. And when you cut ties with someone like this, you don't just walk away from them, you walk away from the illusion they forced you to help maintain. But here's the catch. Sometimes after the mask is gone, you miss the illusion. You crave the fake certainty. You wonder if maybe you were the problem for wanting more. That's the spell of the persona. It makes you question your own depth, your own hunger for truth. But don't be fooled. It's not you. It was never you. You were just the only one in the room who dared to be real. There's a strange kind of suffering that's hard to name. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, cold, heavy. You feel it late at night, when the room is still, when the distractions fall away, and something inside you whispers, "This isn't mine, but I'm carrying it." This is the aftermath of absorbing someone else's shadow. Carl Jung said, "The shadow is everything that the individual refuses to acknowledge about themselves." And here's the twist. What they refuse to see doesn't vanish, it leaks, it seeps. And if you're emotionally open, empathic, psychologically porous, it doesn't just affect you, it inhabits you. Think of the person who was always the nice one, calm, polite, measured, never raised their voice, never admitted anger, never showed jealousy, never expressed desire. But you always felt on edge around them, always felt like you were too much, like you were walking through an invisible minefield. And one day, they exploded. Over nothing. That's the repressed shadow breaking through, because everything denied will find a way out. And if not through them, then through you. This is how you end up internalizing guilt that isn't yours, shame that wasn't born in your story, anger that doesn't belong to your nature. The longer you're around someone who denies their own darkness, the more you begin to carry the weight they refuse to feel. You start saying sorry for emotions they never had the courage to own. You begin suppressing your needs because their mask couldn't handle real intimacy, and you slowly mold yourself into the exact opposite of who you are, just to keep the peace in a war that was never yours to fight. This is emotional possession, and even when you leave, you don't walk away clean. Because here's what no one tells you about toxic relationships. You don't just leave with memories. You leave with psychic debris, echoes, reflexes, emotional ghosts. That's why you still flinch when someone raises their voice. Why you downplay your needs, even in safe spaces. Why you second-guess your intuition, because for too long, your truth was treated like a threat. And unless you consciously process that inherited shadow, you risk becoming the very thing you walked away from. Jung knew this danger. He didn't just warn us about toxic people, he warned us about what they awaken within us. Because if you do not confront what you've absorbed, you will act it out, on yourself, on others, on the next person who tries to love you. So ask yourself now, whose emotions are you still carrying? Whose darkness lives under your skin, disguised as your own? Because until you bring it into the light, it will continue to define how you see yourself, how you connect, how you love. Some people punish you with anger, some with silence, but the most dangerous ones, they punish you with guilt, and they do it in the name of love, ethics, or what's right. Carl Jung saw this pattern clearly. He warned that when morality becomes a mask and it no longer liberates, it enslaves. These are the people who don't scream at you. They whisper. They don't say, "You're bad." They say, "I'm just disappointed." They don't demand obedience. They frame it as wisdom, as maturity, as doing the right thing. And that's how they trap you, not with violence, but with the fear of being immoral for choosing yourself. Because how do you defend against that? How do you explain the feeling that your soul is shrinking when they're using words like respect, responsibility, kindness, and care? Jung saw this as the shadow of the archetype he explored most deeply. The Ein, spiritual guide, who refuses to confront their own inner darkness. Instead of integrating their impulses, their anger, their hidden envy, they repress it and then project it onto others as moral correction. They become a mirror of everything they've buried, not by acting it out, but by accusing you of what they've denied in themselves. And they believe it. That's the terrifying part. This isn't manipulation in the typical sense. This is unconscious tyranny. They genuinely believe they're helping, saving you, protecting you from yourself. But in truth, what they're doing is forcing you to abandon your authenticity, to preserve their illusion of purity. You begin to censor your joy, your sexuality, your wildness, your independence, not because they forbid it, but because every time you express it, you're met with subtle judgment, withdrawal, or moral lectures. You learn that love is conditional, that approval is transactional, that being good means being small. Here's why you felt so confused, so torn, because part of you knew something was off. But how could you question someone who seemed so kind, so wise, so concerned? And when you finally pulled away, what did they do? They made you feel like the betrayer, the selfish one, the one who gave up on something sacred. But Jung saw through this facade. He wrote that when morality is used to control, it ceases to be ethical and becomes a tool of the unconscious shadow. Because the truth is, they weren't protecting you. They were protecting themselves from having to evolve. And when you left, you didn't just walk away from a toxic person. You walked away from a system of control disguised as virtue. But here's the part you need to hear. You do not owe your soul to anyone's comfort, not even if they raised you, not even if they loved you, not even if they claimed to know better. Your truth does not need permission to breathe. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone who becomes a different person every time you get close. One moment, they're warm, attentive, magnetic. The next, cold, distant, explosive, accusing you of things that never happened, crying, then blaming, then apologizing, then repeating the cycle again. You try to hold on to the good moments. You tell yourself, they didn't mean it. You remember the softness, the connection, the potential, and that's what keeps you hooked. But Carl Jung warned us, where there is no inner integration, there is no emotional consistency. What you're seeing is not love, it's not growth, it's not just how they are. It is the chaos of a person possessed by unconscious complexes. Jung described a complex as an autonomous psychic structure, a splinter of the soul created by trauma, by past wounds never processed, by pain that was never given a voice. And when someone is dominated by these complexes, they don't respond to the present. They react to echoes of the past. You tell a joke, they hear an insult. You set a boundary, they feel abandoned. You speak with love, they twist it into accusation. You're not talking to the person anymore. You're speaking to their wound. And when you try to explain yourself, it only makes things worse. Because logic doesn't soothe trauma. Empathy doesn't neutralize projection. You are now inside a storm that isn't yours, and your presence has become the lightning rod. But here's what makes this dynamic so dangerous. It doesn't hurt all the time. There are beautiful moments, tender ones. days when you see the light in them and believe, maybe this time will be different. And that is the trap, because your nervous system becomes addicted to the highs and lows, to the rush of being needed, followed by the terror of being the enemy, to the illusion of healing, followed by the shock of regression. This is what Jung called emotional possession. The self is no longer in control. The complex takes over, and whoever's closest becomes the battlefield. But the more you try to help, the deeper you fall, because no matter how much you give, how carefully you speak, how much you sacrifice, you will never be enough to fix what they refuse to face. And worse, if you stay too long, you begin to split yourself just to survive the chaos. You suppress your reactions, you second-guess your memories, you walk on eggshells so often you forget what solid ground feels like, until one day you look in the mirror and you realize you don't recognize yourself anymore, and that's the moment you must choose. Stays and keep dancing in someone else's storm, or walk away and begin the slow, painful work of detoxing from a relationship that taught you to doubt your own reality. Jung never sugarcoated it. Complexes don't just ruin lives, they infect others. And if you don't cut the psychic cord, you don't just leave with scars, you leave carrying someone else's ghost. Some people don't yell, they don't manipulate with words, they don't control with rules, they just need you all the time, in ways you can't quite name, in ways that leave you drained, but somehow guilty for pulling away. This is the archetype Jung warned of without naming, the one who doesn't demand your obedience, just your constant presence. They come with stories of pain, of how no one understands them, of how you're the only one who truly sees them. And maybe, for a while, you believed that. Maybe you even felt honored, chosen. You wanted to be their safe space. You offered your time, your heart, your light, and at first it felt meaningful, real, intimate. But then something shifted. You started feeling responsible for their moods, guilty for setting boundaries, exhausted after every conversation. Like your energy wasn't yours anymore, it belonged to them, and if you tried to pull back even slightly, they didn't scream, they didn't rage, they collapsed. They became victims. They whispered about how cold you were, how others always leave, how they knew you'd abandon them too. Carl Jung saw this dynamic for what it is: a symbiotic bond, a psychic enmeshment, not a relationship between two whole individuals, but between one person and a mirror, a lifeline, an energy source. You're not with a partner. You're with a parasite. And yet, you keep giving because they don't seem dangerous, they seem wounded. They don't attack you. They need you. But here's what no one tells you. Need can be more suffocating than control. Because you begin to feel that if you're not constantly available, they'll fall apart. And so you silence your truth, you downplay your needs, you rearrange your life around their pain, until one day you realize you don't know where you end and they begin. This is the danger Jung described when he wrote, "The greatest threat to individuation is the refusal to be a separate self." Psychic vampires are not evil, they are empty, and instead of filling themselves, they feed on you. And as cruel as it may sound, you are not their savior, you are not their mother, you are not their light, and if you continue trying to be, you will disappear. Jung believed that healing begins when we become aware of the unconscious forces shaping our behavior, and this includes the unconscious urge to become someone else's source of life. You don't need to hate them, you don't need revenge, but you do need distance, because the longer you stay, the more you'll forget how to breathe without their permission. And the tragedy is this: they don't want you to grow, they want you close, because your growth reminds them of what they refuse to become. And when you finally cut ties, they won't fight you with rage, they'll fight you with guilt, with silence, with stories that paint you as the one who abandoned someone who only needed love. But you'll know the truth. You didn't abandon them, you just stopped abandoning yourself. There is a silence that follows the cutting of ties, not the silence of regret, not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of space. It feels strange at first. You've been so used to reacting, managing, absorbing every moment of your life, entangled in someone else's emotions. But now no one is pulling on your soul, and in that stillness, something stirs, something ancient, something yours. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you truly are, not who others needed you to be. But here's the paradox. You only get to start this process after you've walked away, after you've broken the emotional spell, after you've said, "No more. This is not mine." And that's when the real work begins, because now that you have to rebuild a self that was never fully formed, a self that for years was shaped by survival, a self that was edited, diluted, manipulated to fit inside someone else's narrative, you start to realize you weren't living. You were performing. Jung warned that the greatest danger to the soul isn't suffering, it's the loss of inner reality, the forgetting of who you are beneath the masks, the roles, the guilt. So when you cut ties with toxic people, you're not just removing them from your life, you are clearing a psychic field. You are breaking a spell. You are creating sacred territory within you, untouched, uncolonized, unknown. And at first, that emptiness can feel terrifying. You might ask, who am I without them? Who am I when I'm not rescuing, not fixing, not proving? And the answer won't come fast, because true identity doesn't shout, it whispers. It reveals itself slowly, like light returning to a room that's been closed for too long. You begin to feel subtle things, a boundary you hold, without guilt, a moment of rest, without explaining why, a decision that doesn't need permission. These are small things, but they are sacred, because they mark the return of your inner authority. This is what individuation looks like. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's real. Jung didn't promise that this path would be easy. In fact, he warned that the more real you become, the more alone you might feel, at least for a while, because most people are still asleep, still living in projection, still seeking someone to blame, fix, or save them. But you're not playing that game anymore. You've chosen a different path, the path of radical self-honesty, of emotional sovereignty, of walking with your own shadow and your own light. This isn't just healing, it's rebirth. Most people think the journey ends when you walk away. That distance is healing, that space is freedom. But Carl Jung warned us, the unconscious doesn't respect geography. You can move to another city, block the number, delete the photos. But if you haven't made the unconscious conscious, you are still carrying them. This is the moment you must decide. Do you just want relief? Or do you want transformation? Because real healing begins when you stop reacting to what happened and start extracting the meaning from it. You ask yourself not just, why did they do that to me? But more importantly, why did I stay? What part of me felt comfortable in that pain? What need in me kept choosing that pattern over and over? This is not self-blame. This is self-ownership. It's the moment when you stop trying to fix them in your mind and start listening to the younger, quieter part of you, the one who never learned what real love felt like. Because toxic relationships don't begin with red flags. They begin with familiarity. Somewhere deep inside, their chaos mirrored your own. Their inconsistency reminded you of something. Their guilt, their silence, their need, all of it played a role you unconsciously recognized, and that's what makes integration so powerful. When you begin to see clearly, not just what they did to you, but what awakened in you in their presence. Maybe it was your need to be chosen, your addiction to emotional intensity, your belief that love requires suffering. Jung believed that this kind of self-confrontation was not optional. It was the gateway to individuation. Because if you don't face your unconscious, you'll keep reenacting it. You'll find yourself drawn to the next person who feels like home. But that home is filled with the same old ghosts, and the cycle will begin again. So how do you protect the new self you're building? Not with walls, not with fear, but with awareness. You begin to track your own nervous system. You notice who drains you, who makes you shrink, who triggers guilt that isn't rooted in truth. And you respond not by reacting, but by choosing differently. This is how you break the pattern, not by escaping pain, but by facing the part of you that once needed it And slowly, beautifully, you stop being drawn to the familiar ache. You stop needing to fix, to prove, to save, because you've finally made space to see yourself, not through their eyes, not through old roles, but through your own inner clarity. That's what integration gives you, not just healing, freedom. You thought walking away would bring relief, and in many ways it did. But now there's an emptiness, a quiet sorrow that lingers even in your freedom, and you don't always know how to explain it. Because how do you grieve something that wasn't all bad? How do you mourn a relationship that gave you moments of warmth but also left you shattered? Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this is that pain. You're not just letting go of someone who hurt you. You're letting go of the person you were when you needed them, the version of you that tolerated the unacceptable, that found identity in pain, that wrapped love around chaos and called it intimacy. You're letting go of the illusions, the justifications, the hope that if you just loved harder, they would finally change. You're letting go of the fantasy, and that hurts, because there was a part of you that believed they could see you, value you, heal with you, but they couldn't, because they weren't ready. And maybe, if you're honest, neither were you. Not back then, not fully. You were still afraid of being alone, still addicted to being needed, still terrified that boundaries meant rejection. But now something has shifted. You've outgrown your former self, and as beautiful as that sounds, it comes with a price. You don't fit inside your old life anymore. Not inside the dynamic, not inside the role, not inside the mask you wore to survive. And so you grieve, not just the person, but the loss of false belonging, the loss of what you hoped could be. Carl Jung believed that real transformation requires a death, not always physical, but symbolic, emotional, psychic. And that's what this is, a mourning, a release, a sacred burial of everything that kept you small. And in that mourning you begin to feel something new, not relief, not yet, but truth. A deep, grounded knowing that you didn't betray anyone, you didn't give up, you didn't fail, you chose to return to yourself. And now, after all the noise, the storms, the cycles, you are finally home. There comes a moment after the chaos has passed when the silence no longer feels empty. It feels clean, alive, honest. You wake up and realize that you are not waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for closure, not for someone to finally understand you, because you understand you now. This is what Carl Jung meant when he wrote, "I'd rather be whole than good." You see, the self you're reclaiming doesn't fit neatly into boxes. It's not always agreeable, it's not always pleasant, but it is real, and for the first time in your life, that's enough. Because now you see the difference between peace and pleasing, between harmony and honesty, between love and self-abandonment, and something in you, the deepest part, has made a sacred decision. Never again. Never again will you betray your own nervous system to preserve someone else's comfort. Never again will you silence your truth just to avoid disappointing someone who was never listening. Never again will you play the role of savior, sponge, scapegoat, or shadow bearer. Because now you know your energy is sacred, your presence is sovereign, your boundaries are your birthright. Jung believed that individuation wasn't about becoming better. It was about becoming you, raw, unfiltered, undiluted, not the self shaped by trauma, not the self sculpted by guilt, but the self that rises when nothing is left to prove. This is where the real journey begins, not toward other people, but inward. You start to feel it in the smallest things, the peace of saying no without explanation, the clarity of walking away without apology, the strength of standing still in the face of someone else's storm, and most beautifully, the joy of being with people who don't need to be fixed, who don't see you as a tool or a role, but simply as you. For the first time, connection feels safe. Love feels clean, and solitude, it no longer feels like absence, it feels like presence. Jung's message was never about escaping the shadow. It was about dancing with it, bringing it into the light and letting it teach you who you truly are. And now that you know, you are not broken, you are not cold, you are not too much, you are whole. And the cost of that wholeness was everything that wasn't you. At some point on this path, something subtle shifts. You stop living in reaction. You stop trying to explain. You stop searching for someone to tell you you're enough. Because now, you know, you've cut the cords. You've buried the roles. You've stood naked in front of the pain you used to run from, and it didn't kill you, it freed you. Carl Jung believed that healing isn't about becoming invincible. It's about becoming integrated. It's about looking into the face of every shadow you've carried, especially the ones that weren't even yours, and saying, I see you. I survived you, but I am no longer you. That is the power of conscious transformation. You are not what happened to you. You are not the voices that tried to rewrite your story. You are not the shame you inherited, nor the silence you were trained to keep. You are what remained after the fire. And now that you've returned to yourself, everything changes. The way you love, the way you say no, the way you choose your peace over someone else's chaos. Not out of fear, but out of self-respect. The work you've done, it's not visible to most. But your nervous system knows, your energy field knows, your soul knows, and it shows in the way your presence now says, I will never betray myself again. This is not the end. It's the beginning of a new kind of life. Not built on control or performance or rescue missions, but on clarity, on boundaries that breathe, on relationships that are rooted, not entangled. And hey, if you've been feeling stuck in emotional loops, struggling with inner conflict, or sensing there's a part of you you've never fully understood, you're not alone in that. This guide we've put together dives deep into exactly that. It'll help you understand why certain patterns keep repeating, face the hidden parts of yourself you've been avoiding, begin real emotional healing and self-integration. Reconnect with your true, undiluted self, if any of that speaks to something you've been quietly carrying. Check the first pinned comment under this video. It might be exactly what your soul has been needing. No pressure, no rush, just when you're ready. If this video helped you in any way, leave a like and watch the video that's showing up here on the screen. It might help you even more.